All right, let's just jump right in. We are tackling two of the most, let's be honest, notorious books in the entire Bible. They're famous for being the place where your good intentions to read the whole thing kinda go to die. But what if I told you they're not boring at all? That they're actually packed with high-stakes drama and a pretty amazing historical mystery. You know the feeling, right? You're just cruising through Genesis and Exodus. Epic stories of creation, the flood, liberating a whole nation. And then all of a sudden, bam, you hit a total wall. The narrative just seems to slam on the brakes. If that sounds at all familiar to you, then yeah, you've definitely run into the one-two punch of Leviticus and Numbers. They can feel like this endless list of strange laws and a census that just goes on forever. But believe me, they are absolutely crucial, and we're about to see exactly why. Okay, first up, Leviticus. Let's try to reframe this a little. Instead of thinking of it as some dusty old rule book, think of it more like an instruction manual, a guide that was written for a very specific, very serious problem the Israelites were facing at that exact moment. So remember that crazy cliffhanger at the end of Exodus? The tabernacle is finally built, God's glorious presence comes down and fills it. But Moses, the guy who talked to God face to face, he can't even go inside. It's just too pure, too powerful. So that sets up the central question. How in the world can a flawed, imperfect people live in the presence of a perfect and holy God? Leviticus is the answer to that question. And the core idea, the key that unlocks the whole book, is this concept of substitutionary atonement. The book's most important verse basically says that the life of an animal is in its blood, and that blood is given on the altar to cover or atone for a person's life. This whole system, this is the mechanism that allows an unholy people to get near a holy God without being completely wiped out. And make no mistake, this was not just about following some abstract rules. These were not suggestions. The stakes were literally life and death, as two of the very first priests, Aaron's own sons, were about to find out in the most terrifying way you can imagine. The story is just chillingly direct. Nadab and Abihu offered what the text calls unauthorized fire. We don't know exactly what that means, but the response was immediate and final. Fire blasted out from God's presence and consumed them, right there. That event, happening right at the beginning, sent a powerful, shocking message to everyone. You have to take holiness seriously. Okay, so if Leviticus is the how-to manual for living with God, Numbers is the story of what happened next when they tried to put it all into practice. And just like Leviticus, the name we use in English does it a bit of a disservice. The original Hebrew name tells a much, much better story. So our English title, Numbers, comes from the Greek translation, and it focuses on the two big censuses in the book. But here's the thing. Those censuses are only a few chapters. The Hebrew title, Bamidbar, actually means in the wilderness. And that captures what the book is really about. It's the epic, tragic, and ultimately hopeful story of Israel's 38-year slog through the desert. The book really lays out this whole journey. It starts at Mount Sinai, but then this first generation totally rebels after a bad report from the spies. That leads to the bulk of the book, a 38-year wandering period, where that entire generation has to pass away before the new generation can finally move forward toward the promised land. And that brings us right back to the census, the very thing that gives the book its English name. Because hidden inside these numbers is one of the Old Testament's most fascinating and most debated historical puzzles. So here it is. The first census counts 603,550 fighting men. That's males aged 20 and up, ready for battle. Just let that number sink in for a second. Over 600,000. Okay, so if you've got over 600,000 men who are 20 and older, you have to add in all the women, the children, the elderly, right? Well, scholars estimate this implies a total population of somewhere between 2 and 3 million people. 2 to 3 million people marching, camping, and trying to survive in the Sinai wilderness. The logistics of that are just staggering to think about. And this is where the puzzle really gets interesting. When we look at historical records from that time, like from the famous Battle of Kadesh, it looks like the armies of the era's superpowers, Egypt and the Hittites, were maybe around 20,000 men. This would mean Israel's army was 30 times larger than the Pharaoh's. It just doesn't seem to add up. And the questions don't just come from outside sources. The Bible itself seems to create a problem here. Later, in Deuteronomy, the Israelites are repeatedly told they're about to face nations larger and stronger than them. How could that be true if their army was 600,000 strong? And archaeology backs this up. Canaanite cities at the time were really small, just a few thousand people. Something isn't lining up. So, how do we figure this out? Well, scholars basically fall into one of three main camps. The first approach is to take the numbers literally, saying Israel's massive size and its survival was all just a giant miracle. The second approach kind of dismisses them, saying they're just later exaggerations with no real historical basis. But the third one, and this is maybe the most interesting, suggests that maybe we're just misunderstanding a key Hebrew word. The whole puzzle might actually hinge on one single word, Aleph. Now, we almost always translate it as thousand, but in other parts of the Old Testament, it can also mean a clan, or a family, or even a military unit. So think about it. If a text says, for example, 5 Aleph and 400 men, it might not mean 5,400. It could mean 5 clans that total 400 men. See the difference? Now, that reinterpretation is really compelling, right? It brings the total population down to a much more realistic number, maybe somewhere around 70,000 people. But it's not a perfect solution. It's a fantastic clue for sure, but it doesn't quite give us the final answer. Here's the problem. While these alternate translations work for a lot of the individual tribal counts, when you try to add them all up, they don't quite match the grand totals that the text gives you. The math just never perfectly works out. It tells us we're probably still missing a piece of the puzzle. And that brings us to what's probably the most likely conclusion, and it's summed up perfectly by the scholar R.K. Harrison. He said the numbers aren't meaningless, but they seem to be based on an ancient system of accounting, a cultural context, that they understood perfectly back then, but that is now totally lost to us. It's like we're trying to read a spreadsheet, but we have no idea what the columns mean. So in the end, Leviticus and Numbers aren't a wall. They're more like a window into the deep seriousness of holiness, and a window into a truly fascinating historical mystery. And it just leaves you wondering, doesn't it? If a single word like LF can hold a puzzle this deep, what other secrets are just lying there in these ancient texts, waiting for us to find the right key?